I gotta congratulate everybody here in the room for your perseverance and interest in this subject. You've heard a lot about science, you've heard a lot about genetics, and you must be asking yourselves, well, how do you take all this information, all this scientific stuff, and actually make it work for the good of the industry? How do you make it benefit a producer? How do you make that consumer pay more for a higher quality coffee, that kind of thing? How does that all work? A little over a year ago, World Coffee Research was created to try to do that. And we are the coffee industry and a network of coffee scientists. We got together and decided that we would focus on genetics to do just that, to increase the supplies of quality coffee for the market, which is what everyone's looking for, in a sustainable way that helps producers, it's good for the environment, and that kind of thing. So we chose genetics. Why? Why exactly genetics? Why are we talking so much about genetics? And basically there's one short answer there, and that is because unlike so many other crop species, coffee has had very little research behind it over the years. And I'll just summarize that and make that point very clear by stating that in coffee, we have in the world maybe 30, 35, tops 40 breeders. There's 3 of them in this room. In corn and in rice and in wheat, there are literally thousands of them. And they have been utilizing techniques and advances to make the progress that we see in those food crops. The opportunity for us is to reapply those techniques in coffee to leapfrog over years of tedious work and investment and make incredible progress real fast. So that is the mission of WCR and why we chose genetics and what we are doing. This is our strategic plan. I'm not going to go into the plan, but I did want you to see that we do have one. I will talk about 2 aspects, 2 things in this plan today. The first is the 2 activities that we're doing, so you understand a little bit more how this all comes together. One is the International Multi-Location Variety Trials, which is a short to medium term impact activity. And the other is the development of new breeding populations. Okay, first of all, the multi-location variety trials. What is it? Well, it's just a basic variety evaluation and replacement program. Okay, it's just like, it's not that much different than when, if you have a garden and you're growing tomatoes out there, maybe your neighbor comes over and says, hey, check out this new tomato variety I've been using. It tastes great, it yields a lot, and it's got resistance against some wilt. You try it, it's great, and you go for it. So this is how, on a very small scale, this is what this is all about. Except this is done scientifically, and it's done over the entire coffee belt. So what we are doing is testing 30 varieties over 20 coffee-producing countries, okay? The coffee belt that you see there in the colored countries. And the varieties, there's 30 of them, and they are varieties that represent today the best performing material out there, coming from the 6 breeding programs around the world. They also represent a lot of diversity. So there's tall varieties, there's short varieties, there's typicas, there's bourbons. So we've gotten the best varieties, but we've also made sure that they have the most diversity, all right? A very important thing here is that a variety trial of those 30 varieties repeated 4 times in a single location, okay? But you can't you can't really get the kind of information you need to make a recommendation on a variety unless you test that same variety trial. It lets you plant it at different locations. That's because you have to take into account the environmental variation that goes on. And that's why you look at the country here of Brazil. This is just an example where we have we have 6 variety trials there, but there's 4 here to let you know how and why we do this. You see that the data there, you'll see there's different altitudes. There's 500 meters, there's 1,000 meters, there's irrigated coffee, there's plant densities up to 10,000 plants per hectare. There's others with only 3,000. Some coffees are grown by small farmers in forests, others are grown by large irrigated farms. So that all has to be taken into account, or else we're not able to understand what exactly is going on with the varieties. So that's how we do this. The major point here is that it is done in a scientific manner, and that allows us to say, when we do say that variety A yields 20% more than variety B, or has a much higher or a cup profile than variety B, you can take it to the bank because it's true and it's going to be repeatable. It's got the statistics and all the science behind it that you can believe in. All right, that's the variety trial. And let's just, as a hypothetical example, let's go to Honduras, where we have about 5 million sacks of coffee being produced there. And let's say that a Honduran farmer follows the recommendation to replace his variety with a new variety from these variety trials. And we say and show that farmer that indeed he will receive 10% more yield. That's a conservative figure, by the way, but let's just say it's 10%. That is equivalent to the average yield in Honduras is about a ton a hectare, 2,000 pounds, and that is equivalent to 200 pounds or $300 per hectare of additional income for that farmer. And the important point is that the farmer doesn't have to do anything except change out the variety. Once the seed is in the ground, it doesn't require new inputs or different inputs. No, it's the same thing. He gets the $300 every year. Yes, there is a capital expense at putting it in, and that varies on what it is. But once it's put in, it's not free money, but it's pure profit, okay? That's why farmers are attracted to and really like the variety replacement program. That's why they're attracted to looking at different varieties and tasting that kind of thing. For the country, what does it mean? Well, let's say that 1 out of every 20 Honduran coffee farmers adopted this variety. That's 5%. That would mean, for the country of Honduras, about 20,000 more sacks per year, which at $1.50 a pound is like $4 or $5 million. And these are conservative estimates. So the investment of a variety trial is about $5,000 to $10,000. And look at the return on that investment with just 10% yield gain, in this case, if we're looking at yield. So this is what we're shooting for at World Coffee Research and trying to make an impact early on, and this is what we're calling low-hanging fruit, okay, because this is something that's just out there. The other thing is that in Honduras, for example, many of those farmers and the institutions, eCafe, they have never studied some of the varieties that will be in these tests. It'll be the first time that a variety from Indonesia is there, or India, for example. And the same thing for India, the first time that there's a variety from Costa Rica, or that kind of thing. So it's an exchange of material. The other thing about this platform, variety trial platform, is that it allows us to keep our finger on the pulse of coffee in a scientific manner on a global scale. So we are able, because there's 60 of these variety trials in this coming year throughout the world, and there'll be more later, we're able to measure and monitor climate, what's happening to yield with climate because of climate variables. We're measuring everything. CBD, rust diseases, all the diseases. We can measure what's going on and therefore have some predictive capacity, but also the ability to say what's much more information about what's going on in coffee, where, and why. If, like the big thing now is rust, and certainly you must have asked yourself, what this big outbreak with rust, and how come nobody knew about it? Why is it, just like so sudden? And a lot of the response, the answer to that question, is that there was no monitoring system. There was no scientific monitoring system out there measuring the incident of rust infection in those plants in a scientific way over the required amount of environments. So that's the kind of additional benefit that this particular activity brings to you, the industry, as well as the producer. It's also part of the industry. So that's the International Multi-Location Variety Trial. Now, the second activity that I wanted to address today that relates to a lot of things I've been saying earlier is a complete shift in breeding. Better varieties, okay? Better breeds through the use of previously untapped genetic resources. And now I'll be going back to what Aaron Davis said, what a lot of the people, Chifumi has said about genetic diversity and why it's so important, and how World Coffee Research is going to try to surmount that particular constraint. Okay, well, but before I talk about what we're doing, what it is, let me say what it's not, okay? And it's not genetic engineering. It's not Franken coffee. It's not all those horrible things you're thinking about. We don't have to go there to get the kind of progress and make the kinds of increases in coffee supplies and quality through that method. We can go there, we can utilize new techniques, as you heard about here, to leapfrog over that. And the other thing is that World Coffee Research is industry funded, but it's not just industry funded, it is industry driven. Our board is an industry board, and our board has established a policy that World Coffee Research will not engage in funding any GMO research, okay? So that's just the way it is. And we're not going to go into any of the morals or anything about it. That's just the way World Coffee Research is. Now, how do we make those better breeds, okay? I have this image here. If you can think that these pieces of the genetic puzzle out there with the double helix bands are floating around, and that kind of represents genetic diversity. And you see a kind of a light circle, okay? And that circle, and this is proportioned, by the way, that circle represents all of the genetic diversity today in the Arabica species. It represents what Aaron Davis and others have been talking about out there in the forest. The next circle, the littler one, is actually about 10% of the big circle, represents the genetic diversity of those collections of germplasm that Dr. Chifumi talked about, where people like Aaron Davis went out in the 60s and started collecting material in the forest. And they went to Ethiopian farms, and they took a variety there. And they assembled something like, it's about 2,000 or so, certainly not as many as exist today in those collections, because they're not all coming from the actual source. So that's what that next circle represents. And the final circle, the little one, represents the genetic diversity that exists in the pool of coffee varieties that are being utilized and grown today. Okay? So what we are proposing to do here is to tap the 10 times the amount of the genetic diversity that exists today in those varieties by utilizing new technology to get there, to have a new base of genetic material to build new and better varieties, okay? Maybe, I know it's a little esoteric, so let me make it even more esoteric. We're going to do this like this. We have partnered with Cartier, who you've already heard about, who has one of those germplasm collections. There's about 1,000 original lines that came from Ethiopia and other countries directly, okay? We are going to take every one of those lines basically and do what's known as DNA sequencing. We're going to go in there and figure out exactly the order of all those C's and T's in that slide there. That's the genetic code. That's what we've been talking about here. We're going to find out that order. Why? We can't work with 2,000 strains. We don't know what's in them. All we care about is the genetic diversity, but right at this point, we can't work with all 2,000. How can you? It's just much too large a number. We need to get that genetic diversity in 2,000 lines into about 10 or 20 or 30. And we can do it with this new technology. Just 20 years ago, the technology didn't even exist. 5 years ago, this project would be nearly a $1 billion project. Today, we're able to do it much less expensive, like in the order of $100,000, $200,000. It's just amazing the amount of progress that has been made in genetic research, and we can apply it directly in coffee now to increase the potential of coffee. Getting more to the field part of it here, how do we anticipate in doing it? So we've captured now let's say 50. We're pretty sure it will not be over 100, okay? So we're saying maybe 50. We've got now in 50 strains or varieties or whatever you want to call them, 50 plants, the genetic diversity in all 2,000 or 3,000 of those germplasm collections, okay, of those lines. We've captured it. We've put it into 50 lines. Now we take the best known varieties for their traits that we don't want to lose, yield traits, resistant traits, quality traits, and we cross them. And we let that cross out so that we get an incredibly diverse, segregating population, okay? So when you go into this population, you're going to be seeing things that have never really been seen before because we're utilizing 10 times the amount of genetic diversity than anyone's ever used before to do this. These populations go to the partner countries like Kenya, and Brazil, and Senecafe in Colombia, where the breeding programs are. And then those breeders, those programs actually start the process of breeding or selection within the population. They go in there. So if there's major weather events, hot weather, that kind of thing going on in India, for example, where there'll be one, then the segregating population, the individuals that are still standing, so to speak, are the individuals that maybe you want to select out and advance for their ability to tolerate such an environment, and so on and so forth. And that's just a very simple explanation. We also, will be utilizing, or those people, I should say, will be utilizing assisted marker selection and other methods that we've talked about already today. But the thing is that we're getting a brand new generation of stronger, more resilient, higher quality, and higher yielding genetic material. That's basically it. And this, it's not going to happen tomorrow, all right? It's a long, like someone said earlier, it's a longer term investment. How long is it? Well, I think that within as soon as like 7 or 8 years, we can see something. We can say, we've got something here. Something's looking good. But we don't expect to have anything into the farm for maybe 12 or 15 years. But this is the way so many other important crop species have sustained their quality, their supplies, and all that. And why in coffee we have to make the investment now so that we can reap returns later. It's a very simple thing. And the final thing is that, unfortunately, public institutions are not funding this kind of stuff. The other thing is, most of the countries where the coffee grows, they're not funding it either. So somebody's got to pick this up and move with it if this industry is going to keep going. So that's it. And I guess we'll go on to our next thing.